Hello, welcome to episode 149 of the Book Binge, where we're doing another reading wrap-up and TBR video. I got a ton of reading accomplished in April, even though April was so much chaos where everything else was also concerned that it didn't really feel like I got much done. But if you saw the thumbnail of this video and I'm looking at the stack of what I read this month and it looks a little bigger than it was because of some technicalities, but I got a lot read and it was a lot more than I had planned initially. May isn't quite as big of a reading planned month, although maybe it is if I moved the stacks to their appropriate positions, because some of these things that I started in April I didn't finish. But now I'm just kind of teasing the bulk of this video, so let's go ahead and start like normal with what I read in April. First off, let's talk about a couple things that I finished, which I didn't initially get done in March. On my Kindle, I did finally finish, well, finally, it only took a week or so into the rest of April, if I'm remembering correctly, maybe a tiny bit longer. I did finish reading The Murdered Son, the original draft for Empire, what eventually became Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio. I did finish up that book and it was quite good. It's probably the roughest of anything he's written, as might be expected. It's his first really true attempt at a novel and the original version of Empire of Silence, but there were some things about it that I like quite a bit, including in comparison to Empire of Silence, and some things that I would take nods from if I were to adapt Empire of Silence, for example, most particularly in the first third, where things are still quite similar, but I enjoyed my time with that one quite a bit. Glad to be done with the proofread for that. My work on that project is done. The Anderida special editions for The Murdered Son and another short story to be included with that should be going on sale maybe late this summer and shipping sometime this fall. I'm not 100% sure on the timeline for that one, but that's, I believe, the understanding on that. Next up, I finished The Fires of Heaven by Robert Jordan, Wheel of Time Book 5, a book that I really enjoyed. It's more or less tied for the number one position on my in the Wheel of Time as a series. I'm not entirely sure still if I would rank The Dragon Reborn still above it, or if I would rank that above it. I think that one had more things that I was actively qualmed about, but I don't know if that's actually the proper usage of the word qualm. I'd have to look it up, but we're just going to go with it. But even so, just kind of the memory that I have of enjoying The Dragon Reborn so much and then enjoying this one as much as I did, just overall coalesced and combined in a way that I just really enjoyed my time and made me excited to read further into the series when I was anticipating it being a little bit lower on my ranking and making me want to take the long break. Now I'm actually kind of sad that it's going to be a little while before I get to read New Spring and therefore Lord of Chaos after that. It's going to be a long time before I get to that, unfortunately. Maybe my schedule will let up in ways to allow for me to get to that sooner. Maybe not. We'll see what happens. Next up, I did get a couple of shorter reads done. I did immersively read Outer Dark by Cormac McCarthy, the third one of his books out of the 6, I think, that I've read, that I've actively enjoyed more than I've not. For the record, how things have gone how things have gone so far. That's how English works. The Road and Cities of the Plain I haven't enjoyed so much. All the Pretty Horses was kind of in the middle for me. There were things that I liked and appreciated, but other things that made it boring or annoying for me to get through. Outer Dark I enjoyed quite a bit, but it's hard to recommend. More on that in a review that I have coming out for the book next month. And then The Crossing, which I really enjoy and actually would recommend to anybody who wants to read McCarthy, as far as the slower and more philosophical and more thematic side of things are concerned. And then No Country for Old Men, which I really loved. As much as I can say I really loved McCarthy, and that one more for the plot and story side of things. So depending on what you're looking for with McCarthy, depending on what you like about McCarthy, those two are actually the two that I would personally recommend for him. This one I enjoyed a lot for what it was, but there were there's certain bits of content that appear in this one and the way that certain themes are utilized that make it hard to actively recommend, as I said before. Next up, another thematic read was The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I did not read the other stories as this little binding shows here, but I did read that one novella. In fact, the time that you're seeing this video, 2 days ago, I had a Short Story Sundays video on the death of Ivan Ilyich. So if you want to check out that video, you can absolutely do that. It was a novella that I enjoyed, not quite as much as I was thinking I might or was hoping that I would, but it did have quite a bit to think about and was actually a little bit harder to do a Short Story Sundays video on. Next up, I did Rage. Yeah, I was trying to say the next word in the sentence. Rage by Stephen King under the pseudonym of Richard Bachman, the first book in this Bachman books collection. I remember reading Rage back in 2020 and finding it underrated at the time. Upon my reread, I can say that I had more or less the same feelings. The same things that I didn't really like this go around were the same things that I didn't really like the first go around, and the same things that I liked this time I liked the first time. So, it found that it held up for me, and I do think it is genuinely an underrated book, and anybody who's interested in trying it, I think, should try it if they are able to get their hands on it, because as we all know, it is out of print, so people can't actually get their hands on it except for secondhand. Following Rage, I did read a audiobook, which I will pull up here shortly if I can get to the archived section. I should have prepared this audiobook section just a little bit. It's going to be right there at the top of the list. I can get it focused. Perfect. Forced Perspectives by Tim Powers, the second book in the Vickery and Castine trilogy. I'm just misspeaking all over the place in this video. I apologize. I didn't really like Forced Perspectives a whole lot. There were things about the beginning and the end that I liked quite a bit, at least significantly more than I liked the beginning and end of the first book, most especially where the end is concerned. But there were also some points where I felt like it dragged on a little bit. It's by far the longest of these three books, and I'm not sure it needed to be that long, so it kind of dragged a little bit. It was a little bit more boring than some previous entry or some previous aspects of the book and the book before it were concerned. But, it was a good enough time. As I stand with Tim Powers, is still with this one trilogy that I've read, this shouldn't be your starting point. Where there are people who really recommend reading Powers, I don't think Vickery and Castine is where you should start. But that is all for the books that I completed. What about the books that I started? Well, following Forced Perspectives, I thought it would be about a month before I continued that trilogy, but now I am currently working through Stolen Skies, the third book in Vickery and Castine, and so far I am, oh man, what percentage of the way am I in through this? I'm just going to check Goodreads just real quick because I want to see. I've read 6 chapters of however many chapters there are. I'm 27% of the way through it, and it is significantly better than the second book and also the first book as well. Not only did it start off stronger than even the second book did, which started off stronger than the first book, this one has started off very good and has kept that pace and is definitely on its way to being by far my favorite of the trilogy. We'll see how things go. It's a little bit shorter, so I expect to finish that one up relatively soon. I also started The House of Hades, fourth book in the not the Blood of Olympus, we'll talk about that in a second. Fourth book in the Heroes of Olympus. I'm just a tiny bit under halfway through by the time I'm done with a couple videos that I need to record today, and I'm going to edit them today. And when they're rendering, I'm going to read a couple more chapters of this, and I'll be halfway through it by the time I'm done with those next couple chapters. I was hoping to be done with this, closer to within the next couple days based off of my video and editing schedule. Things didn't quite work out the way that I thought they would because of, my real life job being really crazy and comparatively very busy this week. So things didn't quite pan out that way, but I am going to try my best to have this finished within a week or so. That is what I'm looking at trying to do there. Next up, finally, it's been a long time coming. I started Infinite Jest. At the time that I'm recording this video, I'm right about 12% of the way through of the standard US paperback. I am on page 128 out of the 1,079 pages, so I still have quite a bit to go, about 950 pages remaining, even including the endnotes that I've read so far. This one has worked immensely for me so far, even though I'm still in exposition and only read about half of this exposition stuff. Nothing has really started to come together fully. There have been little hints at things, but I've enjoyed this to an immense degree. If you want to know more about my experience with this, my most recent Fortnite on the Isle video talked about that for a few minutes in spoiler-free context, talking about some of the things that I've been surprised by and that I enjoyed so far. because I haven't really continued too much further than when that video aired. And then also, man, when does this video come out? Last Thursday, I think, if I'm remembering time correctly, I did a reading diary video on Infinite Jest covering all of the pages that I am through so far, with like 10 minutes of spoiler-free talk at the beginning of that video, so you can still check out the beginning of that even if you haven't read the book. But if you have read the book, or if you are currently reading it, you can go and check my spoiler thoughts there. I actually enjoyed that video. It's quite long. It hurt my voice to record because it was late on a Monday and I had talked a lot that day. And I didn't think that video was going to be that long. I thought it would be maybe 25-30 minutes, so that was a surprise. But those couple of videos outline most of my thoughts on the book, so I'm not going to rehash that all here. Next up, I did something a little bit different. I read my first true manga, Goodbye Eri. If you want to know more on my thoughts on this, I did do a review on Goodreads for this one, basically summarizing my thoughts. I really enjoyed this one, even though I knew background of it. I knew a lot of the broad strokes of what would happen, including some of the details. I was spoiled for it because I watched a video that happened to discuss it. That video is the reason that I decided to read the manga in the first place. Even so, I let it marinate for several months. I allowed myself / forced myself to forget a good chunk of what appeared in, this volume, so that I could try to read it with more or less fresh eyes. Even if I still had the broad strokes, I would have some things to still be surprised by, and it worked. There are a couple very minor nitpicks that I have about certain decisions made, even though those decisions make sense in the context of what the author's doing. I still really enjoyed Goodbye Eri. It was very good, and I am going to read another manga relatively soonish. Probably not this month, but we shall see. Next up, let's talk about the short stories that I read over the course of April. There's a few of these to go through. I will briefly mention The Prince of Man, which is the short story included with Andorida's version of The Murdered Son by Christopher Rocchio. I will say this short story is the second most fun I've ever had reading anything that Christopher has ever read. The first most fun thing that I've ever read. Oh, I've got to answer a call. Give me 2 seconds. Sorry about that. That was insurance related. I had to take care of that. Anyway, The Prince of Man was probably the second most fun that I've had with anything that Christopher has ever written. The first most fun thing that I've ever read from Christopher, if that sentence made any sense at all, is something that I actually can't quite talk about yet as of the time that I'm recording this video. So as is, The Prince of Man is a very fun story and genuinely hilarious, and I think that story will definitely be worth picking up Tales Volume 4 for whenever it is that collection is compiled, maybe later this year. Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 4 is going to slap, if only for the inclusion of The Prince of Man. Very good story. Next up, I did read, let's see if I get these in the right order, The Tomb by H.P. Lovecraft, a very enjoyable story, if a little bit frantic and hard to decipher in some ways, and I think purposely so. I read A Tale of Jerusalem by Edgar Allan Poe, which was a very confusing story, and not least of which because of the actual writing style, which is meant to mimic that of, like, say, the King James Bible, for example. Kind of a satirical story, and one that's also a little bit difficult to understand, but was fun nonetheless. I also read a story that I had to read on here, To Build a Fire by Jack London, which will be the next episode of Short Story Sundays. So here in like a little over a week and a half, just under 2 weeks, whenever the next episode is, that is the story that I'll be covering there. A story that I once read in high school and had completely forgotten about until it was re-announced to me, or re-suggested to me by another friend. It was just like, yeah, you should read this one. I'm like, okay, I think I've read that before. Let me read it again. And it is very good. I also read The Whole Town Sleeping, the first book in this curated 100-story collection by Ray Bradbury. This collection was actually curated by Bradbury himself. He selected the 100 stories for this collection. And that first one, The Whole Town Sleeping, very good. I felt like it could have been a perfect prologue to a suspense thriller novel, but even as the story was told, it was very good. It was suspenseful. It was enjoyable to read. His prose was very good in it, and he really had an air of, say, like 1940s or 1950s TV or film, just in the way that, like, the dialogue and the sort of tone of the story was told, and that's something that I really, really like as well. So I just enjoyed overall these short stories that I read this month. Let's talk about next the book of the month, in which case I'm going to start from now on talking about my favorite story, short story of the month, or novella if that applies, versus my favorite novel of the month. You know, novella could fit in either of those categories depending on how I see fit. I'm sorry, but I am going to start selecting one in both categories so that if I happen to read like 5 short stories in a month, like I did this month, that way I can start telling you about my favorite of some of those. I'm going to have to get the book out of under a stack of this collection. Out of everything that I read entirely or finished in the month of April 2024, The Fires of Heaven was probably my favorite book of the month. It just worked very well for me. The final moments of the book, the climax, the resolution was very good. Like I said, it's on par with The Dragon Reborn, which might have been my book of the month in September of 2023 when I read that. It was very good. I really enjoyed The Fires of Heaven. I cannot wait to read the next Wheel of Time book now, specifically because of that book. It really got me hyped up, that is for sure. And my short story, my favorite short story of the month, is going to be Prince of Man by Christopher Rocchio. I just had a really great time with that story, and I was not expecting for it to be funny, like laugh out loud funny. I was cackling through most of the story, and I think most people are only going to really appreciate that story if they've read the entirety of the series up to this point, because they're going to understand all the little references and what's wrong about it. Because if you don't know, Prince of Man is written in the vein of The Pits of Emish by back in Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 1, which was, you know, written by a different historical figure, or like a different historian, quote unquote, within the Sun Eater universe. So it's an apocryphal telling of part of Hadrian's life and isn't necessarily truthful. This one, you can definitely tell the more satirical aspects that Christopher was going for, and it was definitely humorous. Like I said, I was cackling. It made me laugh out loud at a couple points, and it was a really fun time. As for this month's reads, I have quite a bit on the docket. I'm going to be reaching over here for several things every once in a while. First and foremost, I'm going to be continuing Infinite Jest. I'm not entirely sure how much of this I'm going to get through this month. Definitely a couple hundred more pages. I've been reading through it a bit faster than I was anticipating so far. I'm hoping to keep up that kind of pace, if not a little bit quicker, and maybe even be able to finish this book a little bit earlier so as to, you know, open up my schedule a little bit for certain stuff later in the year that I want to try. I've been enjoying it so far, so I'm going to continue to read it at basically every opportunity. Oh, look at that. The frame's now allowing you to see the stuff in that corner, so that's actually a fine place to put that. Next up, I want to finish reading The House of Hades. Like I said, I'm going to try to finish that up pretty soon, probably over the next week and a half, as I'm editing a ton of the videos that I recorded over the last couple of weeks. I thought I'd have a little bit more of this read by now, but that is what I'm primarily going to work on, is finishing that. Oh no, those books just fell down. Not gonna lie, I have no idea why that caused that to topple over when I pushed it to the back. There's not enough weight there to cause it to fall over, but you know, that's just kind of how things go sometimes. Next up, I am going to finish Stolen Skies, that next Vickery and Castine book that I mentioned earlier. It's been going pretty smoothly so far, and I'm hoping it goes smoothly for the rest of it, because I will really enjoy it at the end of the road if it continues at the pace and the quality that it's been going. That's my main audio read. After I finish Stolen Skies, primarily, because that is my main audio read right now, I am going to immersively read The Orchard Keeper, my next Cormac McCarthy book. I've been doing basically one of these a month for the last 7 months. I only skipped November because most of my friends had planned to read Blood Meridian then, and I did not want to read Blood Meridian as my second McCarthy novel after really disliking The Road. In fact, I did not plan to continue with McCarthy at all at that point. But, you know, I've had a little bit more success with most of the other books that I've read. The Orchard Keeper is my next one. I was surprised that I liked Outer Dark as much as I did, considering it was his second book, and he wasn't as polished in his style, for example. But The Orchard Keeper, we'll see how this goes. I've gotten reports from a couple people that maybe it's a little bit slower, it's a little bit more boring, but I think one could say the same thing about Outer Dark as well. It was a little bit slower, it was a little bit more boring, it was a bit more about the thematic underpinnings of that story. So who knows how The Orchard Keeper will work or may not work for me. We will certainly see come the middle of May. Next up, I'm going to be getting to some other easier standalone books that I've been wanting to try. The next one on my list is finally getting back to Michael Crichton after, oh boy, what has it been at this point? That was 2022 when I read The Andromeda Strain, the middle of 2022, I think April. So I think it's been 2 years since I've read Michael Crichton, and I plan to keep him a staple on my reading schedule to continue working through his standalones. I'm finally getting back to him with the terminal list this month, because, you know, this is a triple combination collection. Let's see how many pages that will actually be. Terminal Man won't start until, what, page 239 of this collection, and it only goes till page, oh man, not counting the bibliography of it, 429. So what is that, 200 pages? Is that pretty much exactly 200 pages? Yeah, so that should be pretty easy to read pretty quickly. Crichton reads pretty quickly anyway. That's one that I am intrigued by and excited to get to. Finally excited to get back to Michael Crichton. And then I'm also returning to King one more time. I was going to read this in a different order. I was going to read something else instead of this in May, and like maybe I'll still decide to do that. But right now I'm planning to do my reread of The Long Walk. After my reread of Rage was successful, and The Long Walk is pretty much next in the published order of stuff. It's not quite next, but it's close enough. The Long Walk is going to be the next book that I read. The Long Walk was one of my favorite books ever when I read it back in 2020. And I've continued to prop it up as one of my favorite top 5 Stephen King books. You know, even though I've only read 13 of his books so far, it's one of my favorites. I really love The Long Walk, and I cannot wait to reread it and see if it still holds up, because I don't think it has any reason to not hold up, all things considered. Next up, let's talk about a few of the short stories that I plan to read this month. I might not get as many short stories read this month as I did last. That's okay, nothing wrong with that. The first thing that I want to work through is a little bit of a longer one. That's going to be The Thing Invisible. It is the first story of Carnacki, the ghost hunter or ghost finder, depending on where you look, that is contained in this collection, The House on the Borderland and Other Mysterious Places. The Carnacki stories have come to me as pretty high recommendations next to this title story and the title story of, I believe, the first volume of these William Hope Hodgson collections, and I'm excited to try out Carnacki. Apparently it's like, you know, Sherlock Holmes, but a little bit more like ghost and paranormal type stuff, and, you know, that sounds pretty fun and exciting, so I'm excited to read that story and cover that on Short Story Sundays. Here in a couple months. I'm not entirely sure when that would be covered, but that's going to be the next story I read. After that, I have my staples of Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft that I want to read. The 10-page Loss of Breath by Edgar Allan Poe. This one seems pretty interesting to me. I think after this point, I'm going to start to jump around a little bit more with the bibliography and cover some things maybe that certain people have heard a little bit more of. Just because, you know, the collections are long, it'll take me years to go through them all, and many of the early stories in this collection and the Lovecraft collection just don't contain stuff that people really know anything about or have heard of, so it's kind of weird to just continue to cover those when I could cover at least a couple of the more popular things in the meantime, and, you know, maybe give people a little bit of what they might be wanting if they're following that series. I don't know, we'll see, but I've been doing in order up to this point. But I say that as I'm going to be covering one of Lovecraft's more well-known stories, Dagon, only 5 pages, and I'm excited to cover that one. I'm excited to read it in May. I'm not entirely sure when these 3 stories, any of them, will be covered on Short Story Sundays, but they are going to be the next 3 that I read. As for if I have time, there are just a couple things that I want to comment on. Back when I was thinking I was going to somehow be able to finish The House of Hades before I needed to record this video, I was planning to read The Blood of Olympus in May, the 5th book of the Heroes of Olympus, this being my first edition, first printing, day 1 release copy of the book, one that I have huge nostalgia for. I have huge nostalgia for just that kind of event in my life. I'm excited to read this book, give it a reread, and see how good it is, because it's not necessarily as highly praised of an ending as, say, The Last Olympian was, where Mark of Athena and House of Hades are the more popular picks for favorite in the Heroes of Olympus, but the series is also a little bit underrated as far as Riordan is concerned, in my opinion. If I have time, if I finish House of Hades early enough, and if I have time, I want to read The Blood of Olympus this month. It probably won't happen. This might not happen until June. We will see what happens, but I'm hoping to finish in June because I want for my full series review and ranking video of the series to come out in July. So hopefully I can finish this by the end of June. If I have time, I'm going to try to get to it in May, though. The other thing that I'm going to continue to include on if I have time for a good long while, because it's still on my radar, I still want to give it a shot, is Valor by John Gwynne, which you can probably now actually see in the frame with my very small finger pointing at it. I'm excited to move on with Faithful and the Fallen and continue it finally, but based on these other reading plans, I'm probably not going to have time for that quite in May, but it is still on the back burner. Maybe I'll get to it in June and July, sometime in there, just, you know, right around the time that I read Malice last year. It's basically been a whole year since I read that, which is really weird. The past year, it doesn't feel like it's been a year since then. But either way, those are a couple of the items on my if I have time. We'll see what this month holds. I probably won't get quite as much reading done this month as I did last, because work's probably going to be a little bit more steadily busy throughout the majority of this month. It's not going to be as crazy of work as like things were looking like they were going to be, because I was thinking I was going to be completely moving positions and schedules and stuff. So I should be mostly fine there. Of course, we will see, but you know, we'll see what my reading does. Maybe I'll decide to read just a little bit less in May and actually do a bit more writing, since I've been getting back in that mood, and I have fallen immensely behind after February and March, where nothing happened on the writing front, and, you know, April, where not too much more than nothing happened on the writing front. But that is all information that I give a little bit more of in the next video that I'm recording. But the video that came out on Saturday, so is that 3 days ago at the time of this video releasing, I think. Either way, it's the May State of Affairs video that I talk about a little bit more of that in. So if you're interested in some of the behind the scenes stuff with the channel, that is where you can watch it there if you're interested. But I'm going to go ahead and get out of your face now. I know, even though there's a little bit of stuff that I'm going to have to cut out because this recording went on while I was still, you know, talking on the phone and doing insurance stuff. This recording is way too long. I think I rambled a little bit too long as far as things were concerned. There was a lot of books appearing in some form or another in this video. So I'm going to get out of your face. I'm going to end this video. I'll be back on Thursday with a ranty video. Unfortunately, that's when that video comes out. It's one called Stop Calling Things Underrated, where I turn into a pedantic little annoying piece of garbage and tell people to stop calling things underrated when that's not actually what underrated means, because they're using underrated the wrong way. But that video I had fun recording. That one's going to be a bit longer than I wanted it to be. I still have yet to edit it. That's going to be a scary one to edit. We'll see how this all goes. Either way, like I said multiple times up to this point, I'm going to get out of your face. I'll be back in the next video regardless.